chances are it's already sitting right there in your bathroom cabinet. You know, that basic white bag or card box you picked up for aching muscles or a relaxing soak. Those exact same crystals, the ones people happily spend a few bucks on and then totally forget about, are actually capable of doing more for your backyard and kitchen this weekend than an entire shelf of toxic chemicals from the local home improvement store. I'm going to walk you through how a single scoop of Epsom salt sends ants run in the opposite direction, stops cockroaches right in their tracks, and completely revives a struggling, yellowing garden. My family has been doing this for generations, way before there were massive garden centers packed with dozens of specialized sprays. Folks kept this simple, box handy for all sorts of everyday chores, jobs the modern world has somehow convinced you to pay a premium for, and that's the secret no corporate brand wants to share. Nobody gets rich selling a $2 box of minerals. So they push the pricey synthetic stuff and leave the affordable, natural solution sitting right under your nose. Stick around, because half through this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to bring a near-dead plant back to life for pocket change using the exact same hands, on method my grandfather used with just an old tin can. But before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Drop a comment below and let me know your hardiness zone, or just the state where you're growing. I love seeing where this community is tuning in from, because the pests you are battling down south are completely different from the ones I deal with up north, and that actually changes how you'll want to apply what I'm about to teach you. Growing up out in farm country, I still have this vivid memory of my grandmother standing on the back porch on a warm summer morning. The dew was still heavy on the grass, and she dipped her fingers into a rusty can filled with these crystals, lightly scattering them around her tomato plants before the heat of the day set in. She didn't consider it some clever internet hack. To her, it was just common sense. And honestly, the scientific world is only just now catching up to what that quiet woman already knew. Let's get one major thing straight right off the bat. This isn't table salt. That's the biggest consumption, and it's a crucial one to clear up. Table salt is sodium chloride, and putting sodium in your garden will completely ruin your soil. Epsom salt is a totally different compound. It's magnesium sulfate. It's essentially two vital nutrients that plants constantly crave, locked into water, soluble crystal, magnesium and sulfur. That's the entire secret, and it's exactly why this works wonders while those copycat tricks use regular salt, just scorch everything they touch. Here's why it matters. Magnesium is quite literally the heart of every green cell in your garden. Chlorophyll, the green pigment that captures sunlight and creates foods, simply cannot exist with a single magnesium atom at its core. If there's no magnesium, there's no green, and without green, there's no growth. When a plant is starving for it, the leaves turn pale and yellow between the veins, leaving a green skeleton that looks like delicate lace. Old Timur just called it the yellows, while modern universities terms it magnesium deficiency, but it's the exact same issue. And your dirt runs out of it way faster than you'd expect. Every heavy downpour washes that magnesium deeper in the earth, pushing it way past where the roots can actually reach. The sandier your soil, the faster it drains away. So, a garden bed that produced beautifully a decade ago slowly becomes malnourished. The average grower has no idea why, so they go out and buy a fancy, expensive fertilizer that entirely misses the root of the problem. Here is the precise recipe I swore by, and the one that agriculturists now full supports. Dissolve 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt into a single gallon of water. Give it a good stir until the crystals vanish completely. Pour that mixture around the base of your tomatoes, peppers, and roses about once every 2 weeks throughout the growing season. If you're treating an entire raised bed, you can just lightly brock a handful of the dry crystals over the dirt right before a rainstorm and let nature wash it down in the roots. Don't dump a massive pile, just a gentle dusting, like a very light frost barely catching the grass. So, what does this have to do with keeping bugs away? Well, a robust plant is naturally equipped to fight back. When a tomato plant gets the magnesium it desperately needs, it develops thicker cell walls, sturdier foliage, and its own built-in immunity against chewing insects. Extension offices across the country have stated time and again that well-fed, healthy plants fend off pests and diseases infinitely better than stressed ones. A weak plant practically broadcasts us that pests can detect from across the yard. A thrive plant stays off the radar. The ultimate pest control isn't actually a spray at all. It's proper nutrition, so the plant never rings the dinner bell in the first place. But feeding the roots is just phase one. You can actually use these exact same crystals to physically stop crawling insects right at your home's perimeter. That's where this cheap box really proves its worth. Let's talk about ants. Ants absolutely hate walking over dry, sharp, desiccating materials. Think about it from their perspective. An ant might have a tough shell on top, but its underbelly is incredibly soft and vulnerable. Furthermore, their entire navigational system relies on scent. They leave behind invisible chemical highways, so the rest of the colony can track down your kitchen crumbs and carry them home. If you break that trail, the whole march dissolves in total chaos. Epsom salt disrupts an ant line in two brilliant ways. First, those dry crystals are highly hygroscopic, a fancy scientific term that just means they are incredibly thirsty. They aggressively pull moisture straight out of the air and out of any soft-bodied insect that crawls over them. For an ant, walking across a barrier of these crystals is like trekking through a desert made of absorbent broken glass. Second, and this is the part my grandpa figured out long before reading any textbooks, the crystals physically mask their scent trails. The ants lose their map, can't smell their way forward, and the line instantly breaks up. To use this, just find their entry point. Maybe it's a crack in the foundation, a gap under the back door, or the edge of the porch. Pour a solid, unbroken line of dry Epsom salt directly across their travel path. Make it about an inch wide to form a serious barricade. Then, mix up a second batch. Dissolve half a cup of the salt into a quart of warm water and spray that solution directly over the trail they already marched on. The dry barrier stops new ants from entering, while the wet spray entirely erases the chemical road they left behind. Just apply it in the evening when the ground is dry, and keep the dry barrier out of the rain. That's the one catch water washes the barrier away. But if you tuck it under an awning, a long covered foundation, under windowsill, all it hold up for days. If it's out in the open, just reapply after a storm. The hardware store will happily sell you a $10 can of bug killer packed with harsh chemicals you definitely don't want any near your grandkids or food prep areas. Does it work? Sure, I won't lie to you. But so does a 50-cent scoop of magnesium sulfate you already own, and nobody has to warn you to evacuate the room after using it. That's the compromise the modern market forced us without ever mentioning there was an alternative. But ants are relentless, and treating one line won't win the overall war. You have to go straight to the source, which is where most folks throw in the towel too early. The single ant on your counter is just a scout for 100 more you can't see. If you kill the scout, 40 will already take its place because the nest itself is totally safe, well-fed, and actively breeding. To actually turn the tide, you have to hit their home base. Here is a quiet, old-school method we used. Track down the actual mound. Do this first thing in the morning when the colony is sluggish and hang out near the surface. Mix up a highly concentrated batch. 1 full cup of Epsom salt, dissolved into a gallon of the hottest water you can get from your tap. Slowly pour this mixture directly over the mound, letting it deeply saturate the tunnels, rather than just run off in the grass. The sheer heat and water volume will disrupt them instantly. But as that heavy dose of magnesium sulfate soaks in the earth, it makes their entire living situation incredibly hostile, drying out their delicate larvae and forcing the entire colony to pack up and relocate. You aren't poisoning them in the traditional toxic sense. You're just making the neighborhood completely unlivable, so they evict them. Repeat this early. Morning drench 2 or 3 days in a row for a deeply entrenched nest. Day 1 scrambles their operation, while days 2 and 3 guarantee the ground stays so irritated that they refuse to rebuild. My dad always used to say that you don't need to kill every single ant. You just need to make your yard a terrible place to live, and they'll happily find somewhere else. That kind of patience is the core of these traditional methods. We never rushed to douse the earth in poison. We just made it too much of a hassle for the bugs to stick around. And keep this math in mind. A standard ant from a few thousand to several hundred pounds workers, and a single queen can pump out eggs for years on end. That's exactly why those expensive aerosol sprays never actually finish the job. You're just taking out the visitors while the factory keeps pumping out replacements. Hit the nest, disrupt their home, and you solve the issue for pennies. But ants are mostly an outdoor nuisance. What about the truly crawling invaders that set up camp inside your house? Let's talk about cockroaches, because this is where homeowners get the most desperate and get ripped off the most. A cockroach is the ultimate survivor. They were here before us, and they'll likely outlast us all. However, every survivor has a fatal flaw, and for the roach, that flaw is water. Surprisingly, a roach can survive a really long without food, but without water, it's finished. Their entire biology is designed to retain moisture, protected by a thin, waxy coating. Everything about their lifestyle revolves around staying damp. That's exactly why you always spot them lurking on the kitchen sink, nestled behind the fridge, or beneath the dishwash. They hunt for the warm, dark, and wet. Now recall what we just discussed about these crystals. They are aggressively thirsty. They suck moisture right out of the air and out of whatever they touch. So when you strategically place Epsom salt in those hidden dry crevices where roaches scurry, you are transforming their cozy, humid highway in an arid desert. You are actively drawing up the exact resource they are desperately hunting for. Here is the setup. Take the pure, dry crystals and sweep them in the areas you normally never clean. Push them deep behind the stove, underneath the refrigerator, right by those warm motor coils, along the dark back edges of your lower cabinets, beneath the sink pipes, and in those tiny gaps behind the baseboards. Don't leave a visible mound on your open kitchen counter. You have to force it in their secret pathways, those dark hidden seams, because roaches are edge huggers that will avoid crossing open ground at all costs. To make it even stronger, my grandmother had a brilliant little trick. She'd mix the salt with a dash of regular white sugar. The sugar acts as the irresistible bait, and the salt acts as the deadly trap. Mix them 50-50 in a shallow jar lid, and slide it completely out of sight behind your large appliances. The sweet scent lures them out, and once they start feeding in that intensely thirsty powder, it completely dehydrates them from the inside and out. Give it a couple of weeks. Unlike what the flashy cans promise, roaches won't just magically vanish overnight, but by aggressively starving them of water and destroying their comfort, the sightings slowly drop off. And you'll have achieved it with fogging your entire house with chemicals that you then have to scrub off every single plate and fork. Top university researchers who dedicate their lives to studying insects have proven for decades that the most foolproof way to conquer a roach infestation is to deny them 3 things: food, water, and shelter. Of those 3, water is the one everybody forgets. The pest control companies want you fighting the insect directly. The traditional wisdom says, tough fight the water, and the insect leaves on its own. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, and I want to address it before it stops you. You might be saying, this all sounds fine for someone who just bought a brand new house or built fresh raised beds, but my garden is 30 years old. My kitchen has structural cracks you'll never find. My rosebushes have been sitting in the exact same corner since my kids were small. Does any of this actually help me? It helps you most of all. I want to spend a few minutes on this because standard advice usually ignores established landscapes. An old garden isn't a problem. It's a bank account that has been slow drawn down for years. 30 years of heavy rain has flushed the available magnesium far past the root systems. 30 years of growing the same plants in the exact same spot has completely exhausted the sulfur. That tired look, the pale leaves, the shrinking blooms, the tomatoes that just don't taste right anymore, that isn't old age. That is just hunger. And you can fix hunger in a single weekend with the box sitting in your cabinet. Here is what to do this Saturday. No special tools, no trip to the store. Take your older, established roses. Work 1 single tablespoon of dry Epsom salt directly in the top inch of soil around the base of each bush. Keep it right at the drip line where the feed roots sit, not jammed directly against the main stem. Just scratch it in lightly with a hand fork, and then give it a long, deep watering. Do this once in the early spring as the buds begin to swell, and hit it again in the summer. Generational rose growers have passed this exact trick down for 100 years, and when university trials finally got around to test it, they saw old, stagnant bushes dramatically green up and push thick. Brand new canes straight from the base. The vigorous new growth that a starving bush simply stops making. For your established tomatoes that are already planted in the ground and visibly struggling, use that foliar spray I mentioned earlier. Mix 1 tablespoon in a gallon of water, put it in a spray bottle, and directly mist the leaves early in the morning or in the evening, never in the hot sun. The leaf drinks the liquid magnesium straight in, way faster than the roots can pull it from the dirt. Within a week, you'll see the rich green flood back in those pale, lacy leaves. That's just the plant telling you it was hungry all along. And for an aging lawn or a worn-out shrub bed, just do a light scattering of the crystals before a good. Rain about 1 cup for every 100 square feet, and weave this into your routine 2 or 3 times a season. You aren't starting over, you're just paying back what the years naturally withdrew. An established garden actually responds faster than a new one because the roots are already deep, wide, and just begging to be fed. The lie the outside world pushes is that you need to rip everything out and start totally fresh. Buy new dirt, new plants, new everything. My family never had the money or the inclination to do that. We fixed what we had. We fed the tired ground and brought it back to life. And a well-fed garden is one that naturally resists bugs on its own, which circles us right back around to where we started. So, let me hand you the ultimate border trick for your established beds, the one you can easily lay down this weekend. Go find the plants that always seem to get eaten, the hostas the slugs shred, your young cabbage, the tender new seedlings. Sprinkle a continuous ring of dry Epsom salt crystals on the ground a couple of inches out from the stems. Those sharp, thirsty crystals are absolute miserable for soft-bodied slugs and many crawl pests to cross, the exact same way they are for ants. It's a moat, a dry, sharp, dehydrating moat around the exact plants you are tired of losing. Just refresh it after it rains, and it guards the plants you've babied for years. But even the best moat has a gap in it, and the smartest pest will eventually find it. Therefore, the truly permanent solution isn't just to guard the plant, but to completely change the ground around it so the pests never gather in the first place. And that leads me to the one trick I've been holding back. There is a specific use for these crystals that almost nobody talks about anymore. And when I tell you where I found it written down, you'll understand exactly why I saved it for last. Before I hand you that oldest trick, let me stop for one honest minute, because knowing a single use for this box is good. But holding the entire interconnected system in your hands is what actually saves your yard. You've probably been fighting these battles one at a time, haven't you? A spray this week, a new bottle the next, and still the same ants are back at the doorstep by morning. That endless, piecemeal fight is exactly what I put an end to in my complete digital field guide. It gathers every one of these old-school protocols into one plain, straightforward system that you can download and keep forever. The core blueprint hands you the one systematic mistake that caused every garden fix to fail, so your work stops undoing itself. The advanced sections take you deeper into permanent, root-level weed control beyond the guesswork. And Colony kills science, the nests you can't even see. The very thing we just covered with the ants. And the complete edition ties everything together with a 30, 60, and 90-day seasonal rescue calendar and a quick reference field card, guaranteeing you always know exactly what to do and when. Here is a test you can run tonight for free. The download page promises a tested system built on about $20 worth of basic household materials, entirely safe for kids and pets. Go open your own cabinet right now, count what you already have sitting on that shelf, and see for yours how little it truly takes. The absolute fastest way to get the guides is to scan the QR code popping up right there on your screen, or just hit the link down in the description or the pinned comment. And this is the honest truth, regardless of the season. The essential magnesium that the rain washes out is leave your soil right now, whatever month you happen to be watching this. So the sooner you feed it, the sooner it bounces back. Now back to that third method, the older way that works directly on the soil life itself. Most folks use Epsom salt for the plant or against the bug. But there is a third approach, an older approach, and it's the one my great-grandfather brought over in the family knowledge. The one I had almost entirely forgotten until I started digging. It is the seed and seedling drench. And it does something the chemical sprays can never do. It builds the pest resistance directly in the plant before the pest ever arrives. Here is the traditional method. Before you plant your seeds, whether it's beans, corn, squash, or your tomato transplants go into the earth, you prepare the hole. Not the plant, the hole. Into each planting hole, you drop a small amount of Epsom salt. A stand teaspoon is perfect for a small plant, mixed right in the dirt at the bottom. Next, you add a buffer layer of plain soil over it so the roots don't sit directly on the raw crystals. Then, the seed or the starter plant goes in right on top. Now, what exactly does that do? As that root reaches down a zone deeply rich in magnesium and sulfur from its very first day. And sulfur is the piece everybody overlooks. Sulfur is exactly what plants use to manufacture their own natural defense compounds, the sharp oils and bitter substances that make an onion taste like an onion and give cabbage and broccoli their heavy bite. Those internal compounds are the plant's own bug repellent, built right into its tissue. A seedling that is well supplied with sulfur from the day it sprouts builds massively more of them. It literally grows up wearing armor. I found this complete and confirmed in vintage agricole bulletins, the straightforward government pamphlets. They used to mail out to farmers back in the early 1900s, long before the chemical corporations got a foothold. They wrote about soy sulfur healthier, as a totally settled crops, as a totally settled matter of fact, the exact same way you'd write that rain makes things wet. It was just common knowledge. Then the synthetic sprays came along, and there was massive money to be made in the spray, and absolute zero in the soil. Slowly, that plain fact got buried under hundreds of flashy product labels. The knowledge didn't vanish entirely. My family just kept using it. The outside world simply forgot. So this weekend, if you're putting absolutely anything in the ground, do it the old way. A teaspoon in the hole, a buffer layer of dirt, then the plant. You aren't treating a problem after the fact. You are actively raising a plant that completely resists the problem from its very first breath. That is the stark difference between the traditional way and the big box store way. The store wants to sell you the cure over and over again, every season forever. The old way builds the plant up so robustly that it barely ever needs curing at all. And here is the grand finale. The specific piece I promised you, the one that ties this entire concept together, and that I have never once seen sold in any garden center because there is literally nothing in it to sell. You combine all three. This is exactly what my gram did that July porch and never bothered to explain, because to her it was just another morning chore. You start the plant off right with the salt down in the planting hole so it grows up fiercely armed with its own sulfur defenses. You feed it throughout the season with the tablespoon per gallon liquid drench so it never goes hungry and never rings that chemical stress bell that lures the bugs in. And you heavily guard the border with the dry crystal moat and the scent, erasing sprays so the crawling insects can't physically gather. 3 distinct uses of one $2 box working in perfect harmony, and between them, they successfully do the exact job of a premium fertilizer, a high-end soil amendment. And 3 separate specialized pest products, all from that one white bag sitting on your shelf. That is the secret. The whole video was walking toward that realization. Not one clever little trick, but the system. The plain, patient, whole season way my family used a single common item to do what the modern world now buys a dozen separate bottles to accomplish. And it was never intentionally hidden from you by some cartoon villain. It was just quietly buried by an entire massive industry that found it far more profitable to sell you your problems back to you. One eye at a time, than to let you remember the answer was always $2 and already sitting in your house. Let me leave you with a few more quick ones before we wrap up. The small, everyday uses my community keeps alive so you have the whole toolbox at your disposal. For your potted plants, the ones out on the porch that always look totally exhausted by August, put a teaspoon of Epsom salt in the watering can once a month. Potting soil runs completely out of magnesium way faster than ground soil because every time you water, it flushes the nutrients right out the bottom of the pot. That's exactly why the container plants fade first. Feed them and watch them beautifully fill back in. For your evergreens and shrubs that are going yellow in the needles or leaves, scatter a cup around the base in early spring, scratch it in, and water it deeply. A yellowing evergreen is very often just a hungry evergreen, and this is the absolute cheapest feeding you will ever give it. For the tomato that grows incredibly tall and green but refuses to actually set any fruit, hit it with the foliar sprays right at flowering time. Magnesium actively helps the plant utilize the phosphorus it desperately needs to push out fruit and seed. A well-fed plant at bloom times sets way more tomatoes and holds on them. For slugs and snails on the night, lay down that dry crystals. And if you want to make it even stronger, crust the crystals up a little finer so the berry is packed tighter. Soft-bodied crawlers absolutely will not cross it while it remains dry. For fungus gnats hovering in your indoor houseplant soil, those irritated little black flies that rise up every time you water. Force the top of the soil to completely dry out between waterings and then give it a light dusting, a thin layer of Epsom salt right on the surface. The dry, thirsty crystals make the top inch totally inhospitable to the larvae living in there, and gnats, desperate, need that damp top layer to breed. And for the garden pest that secretly chews up your vegetable leaves under the cover of night, remember the core lesson. The strongest defense isn't the chemical spray you reach for in a panic after the damage is already done. It's the fully fed, well-armed plant, the plant that grew up in magnesium and sulfur, rich ground, and naturally builds its own internal bitterness that the bugs would just rather not eat. Prevention was always the traditional way. We couldn't just run to the superstore every time something looked off. We had to raise crops that could essentially take care of them. And this box was a massive part of exactly how we did it. Now, a few honest words of caution, because I am never going to sell you a miracle. Epsom salt is not a magic cure for absolutely everything. And anybody on the internet who tells you it definitely has something to gain, it absolutely will not fix soil that is short on nitrogen. That's a completely different hunger with a completely different solution. By itself, it won't totally eradicate a heavy, massive infestation that has already completely taken over your property, though it will certainly help you turn the tide. And yes, you can absolutely overdo it. Dumping too magnesium into ground can chemically lock up other vital nutrients the plant desperately needs to survive. So, more is absolute not better here. Stick to the exact amounts I gave you. Stick to the exact amount per gallon, a teaspoon in the planting hole, and always use a very light hand. My grandfather had a great saying about fertilizers and salt both. You can always add a little more tomorrow, but you can never take it back out today. The point isn't that this one box magically does everything. The point is that it does a great many things incredibly well for almost no money at all. And the outside world was quite conditioned into forgetting that, just so it would keep buying the expensive single-purpose plastic bottles instead. One simple box on the shelf, used with just a little bit of knowledge, completely replaces a whole row of commercial products that each cost way more than the box and deliver half the results. That is what I want you to walk away with most of all. Not just the garden tricks, even though the tricks are totally real and they absolutely work. What I really want you to keep is the plain, undeniable truth sitting right underneath them. You have been actively sold your own helplessness. You have been conditioned to believe that every single problem in the garden and the kitchen requires its own specific product, its own dedicated aisle, and its own premium price tag. When the reality is that a handful of common sense knowledge and a $2 bag handles most of it the exact same way it handed for my grandparents and theirs before them. You didn't magically lose the ability to do these things. That independence was just quietly stripped away from you, one clever commercial at a time, until you completely forgot you ever had it. And now you have it back. Honestly, that realization is worth more than any single gardening trick I handed you today. If you're the kind of person who is absolute tired of overpaying for what nature and a little bit of practical know how already provide for free, then you belong here with the rest of us. We are the folks who would vastly rather remember the liable old ways than keep renting the expensive new ones. That's exactly who we are. People who flat out refuse to keep paying, season after season, for something a basic box on the shelf handles for pennies. So here is what I'm asking you to do right now. Scroll back down to that comment section and let me know your growing zone or your state, just like I asked at the beginning. I genuinely read through them, and it dictates exactly what kind of videos I make next. Because the specific ant that plagues a homeowner down in the south isn't the same one terrorizing, family in the Midwest, and I want to properly serve the folks who are actually taking the time to watch. Don't just think it in your head, type it out. This corner of the internet is pretty quiet, and I would love to hear from you. And if you want to keep unearthing this kind of knowledge, the straightforward, practical skills that the corporate world intentionally buried because there was no profit in them, then I'd love for you to come along with us. This isn't just about supporting a YouTube channel. It's about a group of like-minded people slowly putting back together, piece by piece, the common sense that got sold off to the highest bidder. Hit subscribe and stand with the folks actively doing the work. Next time, I'm going to reveal the one surprise thing my grandmother always kept in a glass jar right by the kitchen sink. And if you're still sticking with me here, this is where it gets really good. Inside my premium online community, I continue this exact topic, walking you through the entire season, long regimen, step by step. And when you inevitably run into a question, you ask me directly, and I personally answer you. You don't have to figure this all out alone. Thousands of traditional, old ways. Growers are already inside sharing their wisdom. Just point your phone's camera at the code popping up on your screen right now. And keep in mind, you can cancel at any time with a single click. If these Epsom salt strategies brought you some value today, please stick around, subscribe, and browse through my other videos where I dive into plenty more simple, natural methods to keep your home and garden totally pest-free.